The lights blazed hot on the CNN town hall stage, as 94-year-old Clint Eastwood adjusted his black cowboy hat, that familiar squint cutting through the studio like a knife. The legendary actor's weathered hands gripped the arms of his chair with the confidence of a man who had never lost a public confrontation. Across from him sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, her bright yellow blazer a stark contrast to Eastwood's all-black ensemble, her gold jewelry catching the studio lights as she reviewed her notes one final time. The Hollywood legend had arrived at CNN with the swagger of someone delivering what he thought would be an easy takedown of the young Democrat from Texas. His team had briefed him on her background: freshman congresswoman, civil rights attorney, relatively unknown outside political circles. In Eastwood's mind, this was going to be simple: use his legendary status and decades of cultural authority to expose her as just another inexperienced politician trying to play in the big leagues. "This little lady thinks she knows about America," Eastwood growled into his microphone, his voice carrying that iconic dirty hairy rasp that had intimidated countless movie villains. "But she's never lived through what real Americans have faced." The audience of 2,000 carefully selected participants stirred uneasily, phones already recording, sensing something explosive was about to happen. Conservative viewers leaned forward in anticipation, expecting their Hollywood hero to demolish this progressive politician. Liberal audience members shifted nervously, hoping their representative could hold her own against a cultural icon. Crockett sat perfectly still, her expression calm but her eyes sharp as laser beams, her pen poised over a legal pad filled with meticulously researched talking points. She had walked into this CNN studio knowing exactly what Eastwood planned to do. Her team had studied every political appearance he'd made since his infamous empty chair speech at the 2012 Republican National Convention. They had prepared for his intimidation tactics, his appeals to age and experience, his tendency to dismiss younger politicians as inexperienced idealists. What happened in the next 30 seconds would not only shock the legendary actor, but create a viral moment that would dominate social media for weeks and potentially reshape both of their political legacies forever. Before we dive into this incredible showdown, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss these epic political moments. Now let's see how a 40-year-old congresswoman just schooled one of Hollywood's biggest legends. This wasn't just another political debate. This was the moment when old Hollywood met new politics, and only one would walk away with their reputation intact. Eastwood thought his decades of fame and conservative credibility would easily overpower the young black woman from Dallas. He was about to learn the hardest lesson of his 94 years on this planet. The CNN moderator, Anderson Cooper, tried to maintain control, but everyone in that studio could feel the electricity. Two generations, two completely different Americas, about to collide in the most unexpected way possible. Eastwood had his legendary status and that famous glare. Crockett had something far more powerful: the truth, preparation, and absolutely nothing to lose. At 94 years old, Clint Eastwood represents everything old-school Hollywood once stood for. The man who made "Make My Day" a household phrase, who directed Oscar-winning films like Unforgiven and $1 Million Baby, and who famously spoke to an empty chair at the 2012 Republican National Convention. His weathered face tells the story of 7 decades in show business, from spaghetti westerns in the 1960s to modern dramas that earned him critical acclaim well into his 80s. Eastwood's cultural influence extends far beyond entertainment. He represents a generation of American masculinity that solved problems through decisive action and moral clarity. His characters never backed down from fights, never apologized for their principles, and always emerged victorious through a combination of skill, determination, and unwavering conviction. Sitting in that CNN studio, he embodied all of these qualities, believing his real-life persona was just as powerful as any character he had ever portrayed on screen. The veteran actor came to this CNN town hall with all the confidence of a man who had never been challenged by someone like Jasmine Crockett. In his mind, this was going to be simple. A young politician, relatively new to Congress, facing off against a cultural icon who had been shaping American entertainment since before she was born. His plan was straightforward: use his legendary status and conservative talking points to make her look inexperienced and out of touch with real American values. Eastwood had spent the previous week preparing for this appearance, but his preparation consisted mainly of reviewing his greatest hits, memorable quotes from his films, references to his decades of success, appeals to traditional American values that his generation had fought to preserve. He viewed this town hall as just another performance, Another opportunity to play the role of the wise elder statesman, putting a young upstart in her place. The Hollywood veteran had built his entire career on playing tough guys who solved problems with quick wit and decisive action. From The Man with No Name trilogy to Inspector Harry Callahan, his characters never backed down from a fight. They faced down corrupt politicians, heartless criminals, and anyone else who threatened innocent people. Sitting in that CNN studio, he adjusted his trademark black hat and prepared to treat this political debate like another movie scene. One where he was clearly the star and the outcome was never in doubt. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, representing Texas's 30th district, walked into that studio carrying the hopes of a new generation of American politics. At 40 years old, this former civil rights attorney had already made waves in Congress, with her sharp legal mind and fearless approach to challenging established power structure. Her bright yellow blazer wasn't just a fashion choice. It was a statement that she wasn't going to blend into the background or be intimidated by anyone, not even a Hollywood legend. Crockett's background tells a very different American story than Eastwood. Born and raised in Missouri, she worked her way through law school, became a civil rights attorney, and entered politics to fight for communities that had been overlooked for too long. Her experience defending people against powerful institutions had prepared her for moments exactly like this one. She knew that Eastwood would try to use his fame and age to dismiss her, and she came ready with facts, passion, and a deep understanding of the issues that actually matter to working Americans. Unlike many politicians who might be starstruck meeting a Hollywood icon, Crockett saw Eastwood for what he was in this context: another privileged older white man trying to lecture her about America. Her legal training had taught her to cut through intimidation tactics and focus on evidence and truth. She had spent hours preparing for this moment, knowing that whatever happened on this stage would be watched by millions of Americans trying to decide what direction their country should go. This CNN town hall wasn't just another cable news program. It represented a clash between two completely different visions of America. Eastwood embodied the conservative nostalgia for a simpler time, when Hollywood heroes were white men who solved problems with violence and one-line. Crockett represented the diverse, educated, and progressive future that many Americans are fighting to create. The national audience watching knew they were witnessing something special. Social media was already buzzing with anticipation. Conservative viewers expected Eastwood to put this young Democrat in her place, using his decades of experience and cultural authority to expose her as just another liberal politician. Progressive viewers hoped Crockett would hold her own against the legendary actor, but many worried that his fame and age might give him an unfair advantage. The timing couldn't have been more perfect for viral content. Both figures represented their respective generations and political movements perfectly. Eastwood, with his cowboy hat and gravelly voice, looked like he had stepped out of one of his own westerns. Crockett, polished and professional in her bright blazer, represented the new face of American politics, young, diverse, and unafraid to challenge anyone, regardless of their status. Anderson Cooper, moderating the town hall, understood the television gold he was sitting on. This wasn't just about policy positions or political talking points. This was about respect, generational change, and who gets to define what America means in the 20th. The winner of this confrontation wouldn't just score political points. They would shape the narrative for months to come. Clint Eastwood leaned back in his chair with the casual confidence of a man who had never met a problem he couldn't stare down. His opening move was classic Hollywood intimidation, delivered with that trademark squint that had made him famous in dozens of films. "Listen, young lady," he began, his voice carrying the authority of 7 decades in show business. "I've been making movies about real American heroes since before you were born. I know what this country needs, and it's not more politicians making promises they can't keep." The audience shifted in their seats. Some applauded, older conservatives who remembered when Eastwood was their action hero, speaking at Republican conventions and embodying a certain type of American masculinity. Others sat in uncomfortable silence, recognizing the dismissive tone he was using with a sitting member of Congress. Crockett maintained her composure, taking notes on a small pad, her expression revealing nothing. She had expected this exact approach. In her legal career, she had faced countless older white men who thought they could intimidate her with condescending language and appeals to their own authority. She knew exactly how to handle this situation. Eastwood continued, warming up to his theme. "You talk about helping people, but what have you actually accomplished? I've created jobs, made films that inspire Americans, built businesses. You've been in Congress for what, a couple of years, and you think you can lecture me about America? Sensing that his opening hadn't landed quite as hard as he'd hoped, Crockett was still sitting calmly, still taking notes, still looking completely unruffled. Eastwood decided to get more personal with his attack. "The problem with your generation," he said, leaning forward and pointing a weathered finger in her direction, "is that you think you deserve everything handed to you. You want to change America without understanding what made America great in the first place." The CNN cameras captured every reaction in the studio audience. Conservative viewers nodded along, appreciating what they saw as Eastwood speaking hard truths to an entitled millennial politician. Liberal viewers began to look uncomfortable, recognizing the familiar pattern of an older white man trying to put a younger black woman in her place. Eastwood wasn't finished. "I've worked for everything I've got, started with nothing, built a career through determination and talent. Your generation wants to tear down everything my generation built, without having any idea what it took to build it." Anderson Cooper tried to interject, to give Crockett a chance to respond, but Eastwood held up a hand with the authority of a man accustomed to controlling every scene he was in. "Let me finish," he growled. "This representative from Texas thinks she can come up here and tell Americans how things should be. But has she ever built anything? Has she ever created jobs? Has she ever had to make the tough decisions that actually matter?" By this point, Eastwood was fully committed to his strategy of using his age, fame, and conservative credentials to completely overwhelm the young Congresswoman. He stood up from his chair, a dramatic move that his decades in Hollywood had taught him would command attention and establish dominance. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said, practically spitting her name, "represents everything that's wrong with modern politics. Young, inexperienced, full of theories but short on real-world knowledge. She's never had to make a payroll, never had to worry about whether her decisions would put people out of work." The studio audience was now completely engaged, sensing that this had moved far beyond a normal political discussion, into something much more personal and volatile. Phones were out everywhere, recording every word, ready to post clips to social media the moment something explosive happened. Eastwood paced slightly, his cowboy boots clicking on the stage floor, playing to the cameras like the seasoned performer he was. "I've been making films about American heroes for 70 years. Real heroes who solve problems through action, not endless talking. But this generation of politicians, they think talking is action. They think good intentions are the same as results." He turned to face Crockett directly, his famous squint intensifying. "So tell me, Congresswoman, what have you actually built? What problems have you actually solved? Or are you just another politician who thinks America owes you something?" Conservative viewers applauded loudly after each of Eastwood's points, clearly enjoying watching their Hollywood hero take on a progressive politician. Liberal viewers sat in tense silence, waiting for Crockett to respond, some clearly worried that Eastwood's fame and aggressive tactics might overwhelm her. Anderson Cooper was struggling to maintain control of the town hall. This had evolved far beyond the planned format into something resembling a political wrestling match, with Eastwood using every tool in his Hollywood arsenal to dominate the conversation. Social media was already exploding. Clips of Eastwood's attacks were being shared across platforms, with conservatives cheering their champion and progressives growing increasingly angry at what they saw as a disrespectful attack on a sitting member of Congress. But through it all, Jasmine Crockett sat quietly, still taking notes, still maintaining that calm expression that had served her so well in courtrooms and congressional hearings. She wasn't rattled, wasn't defensive, wasn't giving Eastwood the reaction he was clearly trying to provoke. She was waiting for her moment, and everyone in that studio, including Eastwood himself, was about to discover that she had been preparing for this exact confrontation her entire political career. The tension in the room was reaching a breaking point. Eastwood had thrown everything he had at her, his fame, his age, his conservative credentials, his Hollywood authority. He had used every intimidation tactic that had worked for him in 7 decades of show business. And Jasmine Crockett was still sitting there, calm as ever, ready to show America what happens when preparation meets opportunity. Anderson Cooper finally managed to regain control of the town hall, holding up both hands to quiet the increasingly restless audience. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Mr. Eastwood has raised several points about your experience and qualifications. How do you respond?" Jasmine Crockett slowly looked up from her notepad, her expression shifting from calm patience to something much more focused and dangerous. She had been a civil rights attorney for years before entering politics, and she knew exactly how to handle men who thought they could intimidate her with volume and reputation. She set down her pen, looked directly at Clint Eastwood, and delivered the response that would become the defining moment of both their careers. "Miss Eastwood," she began, her voice steady but carrying an edge that made everyone in the studio lean forward, "I appreciate that you've had a long and successful career in Hollywood. But let me tell you what I've built since you—" Crockett stood up slowly, matching Eastwood's earlier theatrical move, but with completely different energy. Where he had been aggressive and dominating, she was controlled and precise. Where he had relied on volume and intimidation, she was about to use facts and logic, like surgical instruments. "You want to know what I've built? I built a legal practice defending civil rights before I ever ran for office. I built coalitions that actually changed laws, not just made movies about heroes. I built relationships with working families who couldn't afford high-powered attorneys, but deserved justice anyway." The studio audience was now completely silent, recognizing that something significant was happening. Even the conservative viewers who had been cheering Eastwood were paying attention, sensing that the dynamic in the room had shifted dramatically. "But since you brought up accomplishments," Crockett continued, her voice gaining strength, "let's talk about what I've actually done in Congress. In my time in office, I've authored legislation that has created thousands of jobs in renewable energy. I've secured federal funding for infrastructure projects that will employ construction workers for decades. I've worked across the aisle to pass bills that actually help working families." Eastwood tried to interrupt, raising his hand dismissively, but Crockett was just getting started. Years of courtroom experience had taught her how to control a room, and she wasn't about to let a Hollywood actor, no matter how famous, derail her response. "Miss Eastwood, you talked about my generation wanting everything handed to us. Let me tell you about my generation. I worked 3 jobs to pay for law school. I started my legal career with $100,000 in student loans and a commitment to help people who couldn't help themselves. I didn't have a movie studio backing me or decades of film profits to fund my career." The audience was now completely engaged, phones recording every word, sensing that they were witnessing something that would be talked about for months. Conservative viewers were beginning to look uncomfortable as they realized that this young congresswoman was not the inexperienced politician they had expected. "You want to talk about building things? I built my career from nothing, just like you claim you did. But the difference is, everything I built was designed to help other people build their lives too. Every case I won as a civil rights attorney helped someone else get justice. Every bill I've passed in Congress helps working families across Texas and America." Crockett reached into her blazer and pulled out a thick folder, a move that made every political observer in the audience immediately pay attention. Any politician who comes prepared with documentation is about to make their opponent's day very difficult. The folder was clearly well organized, with color-coded tabs and sticky notes marking specific sections. This wasn't a prop. This was the toolkit of someone who had spent countless hours preparing for exactly this moment. "Mr. Eastwood, you asked what I've accomplished. Let me give you some specifics, since you seem to prefer facts over feelings." Her voice now carried the precise tone of a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury, each word calculated for maximum impact. She opened the folder with practiced efficiency, her fingers finding the exact page she needed without hesitation. "In my 2 years in Congress, I've secured $50 million in federal funding for job training programs in Texas. I've helped pass legislation that has created over 10,000 jobs in renewable energy across the South. I've authored bills that have reduced prescription drug costs for seniors by an average of The studio camera zoomed in on her hands as she flipped through pages of documentation, each one representing hours of legislative work, committee meetings, and constituent services that Hollywood celebrities never have to deal with. "The infrastructure bill I co-sponsored has funded the repair of 47 bridges in Texas alone, creating 3,000 construction jobs. The small business support legislation I helped draft has provided loans to over 500 minority-owned businesses in my district." She held up a specific page, turning it toward the cameras so viewers could see the official congressional letterhead and detailed statistics. "This isn't rhetoric, Mr. Eastwood. These are documented results, verified by the Congressional Budget Office, and tracked by independent organizations that monitor legislative effectiveness." The studio was dead silent except for the sound of Crockett's voice and the clicking of phone cameras recording every word. Even Anderson Cooper was taking notes, recognizing that this was turning into one of the most impressive political performances he had witnessed in decades of journalism. Conservative audience members who had come to cheer for Eastwood were now paying close attention to numbers they couldn't dispute, even if they disagreed with the policies behind them. Crockett said, closing the folder and looking directly at the legendary actor, "Numbers are just numbers. Let me tell you about some of the people I've actually helped, since you seem to think I haven't built anything real." Her voice softened slightly, but the steel remained. "Last month, I helped a 67-year-old veteran in Dallas get the disability benefits he had been fighting for since Vietnam. The week before that, I worked with a single mother in Fort Worth to get her son the special education services he needed. 2 weeks ago, I helped a small business owner in my district to navigate federal regulations so he could expand his company and hire 12 more people." The audience was now completely captivated. This wasn't just political rhetoric. These were specific examples of actual work, actual results, actual people whose lives had been improved by this Congresswoman's efforts. "You see, Eastwood, while you've been making movies about heroes, I've been actually helping real people solve real problems. While you've been talking to empty chairs at political conventions, I've been in committee hearings, fighting for legislation that makes a difference in people's daily lives." Crockett was now fully in command of the room, and she wasn't finished. She had saved her most devastating argument for last, and she delivered it with the precision of a surgeon and the confidence of someone who had done her homework. "You want to lecture me about understanding America? Eastwood, when was the last time you spent a day in a working-class neighborhood? When was the last time you had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries? When was the last time you worried about whether you could afford your prescription medication?" Eastwood's famous squint was now looking less intimidating and more confused. He had expected to easily overpower this young politician with his celebrity status and conservative talking points. Instead, he was being systematically dismantled by someone who had come prepared with facts, figures, and real-world experience. "You've been wealthy and famous for so long that you've forgotten what regular Americans actually face every day. I represent those Americans, the ones who don't have movie studios and restaurant chains to fall back on, the ones who actually need government to work for them, not just give tax breaks to millionaires and celebrities." Crockett continued, her voice now carrying the moral authority of someone speaking absolute truth. "My generation inherited climate change, a housing crisis, student, and an economy that had been stripped bare by previous generations who prioritized short-term profits over long-term sustainability." The studio audience was now completely silent, hanging on every word. Even the conservative viewers who had come to cheer for Eastwood were listening intently, many of them nodding along as they recognized the truth in what she was saying. "We didn't ask for these problems, Mr. Eastwood, but we're the ones who have to solve them. And instead of complaining about how hard things used to be, we're actually doing the work to make things better for everyone." She gestured toward him with the respect due to his age, but none of the deference he had expected. "You had the luxury of building your career in an America where a white man with talent could become successful through hard work alone. I've had to build my career in an America where I face obstacles you never had to consider, and I've still managed to accomplish more for working people in 2 years in Congress than most politicians do in decades." Jasmine Crockett paused, looked directly into the CNN cameras, and delivered the line that would be quoted, shared, and remembered long after everyone had forgotten this town hall was supposed to be about policy issues. "Mr. Eastwood, you've spent 70 years playing heroes in movies. I've spent my entire adult life actually being one in real life, and the difference is, my work actually helps people instead of just entertaining them." The studio exploded. Half the audience leaped to their feet in applause while the other half sat in stunned silence. Anderson Cooper was frantically trying to regain control, but everyone knew that the town hall was effectively over. Jasmine Crockett had just delivered one of the most devastating political performances in recent memory, and every phone in that studio was uploading clips to social media. Clint Eastwood sat back in his chair, his famous squint now looking more like confusion than intimidation. The man who had dominated Hollywood for 7 decades, who had stared down countless villains on screen, had just been completely outclassed by a 40-year-old congresswoman from Texas, who had come prepared for exactly this moment. The moment Jasmine Crockett finished speaking, the CNN studio erupted into chaos that would define political discourse for weeks to come. Half the audience was on their feet applauding, while the other half sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Anderson Cooper, a veteran of thousands of political interviews, later said it was one of the most electric moments he had ever experienced in television journalism. Clint Eastwood, who had entered the studio with the swagger of a man who had never lost a verbal confrontation, sat slumped in his chair, his famous black cowboy hat slightly askew. The squint that had intimidated countless movie villains now just looked like an old man trying to figure out what had just happened to him. He attempted a few weak comeback lines, something about Hollywood experience and respecting your elders, but his voice lacked conviction, and his words were drowned out by the continuing applause for Crockett. The CNN cameras captured every moment of Eastwood's visible deflation. The man who had built a career on projecting strength and control looked visibly shaken by the systematic dismantling he had just experienced. His handlers rushed to get him off the stage as quickly as possible, but the damage was already done. Every phone in that studio had recorded his humiliation. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett remained composed and professional, shaking hands with audience members and briefly speaking with Anderson Cooper. She had accomplished exactly what she came to do, not just defend herself against a legendary figure's attacks, but demonstrate the competence, preparation, and real-world experience that her generation of politicians brings to American government. Within minutes of the town hall ending, social media exploded with clips, reactions, and commentary that would trend for days. The hashtag Jane Crockett Destroys Eastwood began trending on Twitter within 30 minutes, with thousands of users sharing the moment when she delivered her knockout line about playing heroes versus being one. The most viral clip, viewed over 5 million times in the first 24 hours, showed the exact moment when Crockett stood up and began her systematic response to Eastwood's attacks. Users shared it with captions like, "This is what preparation looks like," and "Young politician schools Hollywood legend with facts." Conservative social media accounts initially tried to defend Eastwood, posting clips of his earlier attacks on Crockett and praising his real talk about entitled millennial. But as more complete clips of Crockett's response circulated, even some conservative commentators began acknowledging that she had outperformed the Hollywood icon. One prominent conservative blogger wrote, "I disagree with her politics, but Crockett came prepared and Eastwood did. This is on him." Progressive accounts went wild with celebration. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, "This is what happens when you underestimate a brilliant woman who's done her homework." Jasmine Crockett just gave a masterclass in political communication. The tweet received over 200,000 likes and 50,000 retweets within hours. Memes flooded every platform. The most popular showed a side-by-side image of Eastwood, looking confident at the beginning of the town hall and looking defeated at the end, with the caption, "When you think you're Dirty Harry but get schooled by a civil rights attorney." Another viral meme used the famous man with no name image from Eastwood's Western films, with the updated caption, "Man with no facts." CNN's own post-show analysis spent 30 minutes breaking down Crockett's performance, with political analysts calling it one of the most effective political communications we've seen in years. The New York Times published a same-day analysis titled, "How Jasmine Crockett Turned a Celebrity Ambush into a Career-Defining Moment." The article detailed how Crockett had clearly prepared for exactly this type of confrontation, researching not just policy positions, but also the specific arguments that aging conservative celebrities typically use against young progressive politicians. The Washington Post focused on the generational aspects of the confrontation, with a headline reading, "When Old Hollywood Met New Politics, Experience Defeated Fame." Their analysis noted that Crockett's victory represented a broader shift in American political discourse, where celebrity status and traditional authority figures no longer automatically command respect without substantive arguments to back them up. Fox News found itself in an awkward position, trying to defend Eastwood while acknowledging that he had been clearly outperformed. Their evening coverage focused more on Crockett's disrespectful tone toward an elderly Hollywood icon, but even their commentators had to admit that her facts were accurate, and her arguments were compelling. MSNBC went all in on celebrating Crockett's performance, with Rachel Maddow dedicating an entire segment to analyzing how the Congresswoman had used her legal training to systematically dismantle Eastwood's attack. "This is what it looks like when someone comes prepared to a battle of wits," Maddow commented. The town hall confrontation had immediate and lasting effects on both figures' political standing. For Jasmine Crockett, the performance elevated her from a relatively unknown freshman congresswoman to a national Democratic star overnight. Her congressional office reported receiving over 10,000 messages of support in the first 48 hours after the town hall, with many praising her for standing up to Hollywood elites and showing what real leadership looks like. Democratic Party leaders took notice immediately. Within a week, Crockett received invitations to speak at major fundraising events across the country, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's office reached out about increased committee assignment. Progressive organizations began talking about Crockett as a potential candidate for higher office, with some even suggesting she should consider a Senate run or a spot on a future presidential ticket. For Clint Eastwood, the aftermath was far more damaging. Conservative media personalities who had long celebrated him as a Hollywood conservative began distancing themselves from his performance. The Federalist published an article titled, "How Clint Eastwood Became Everything Wrong with Celebrity Politics," arguing that his reliance on fame rather than facts represented exactly the kind of superficial political engagement that conservatives should reject. Several conservative organizations quietly canceled planned events featuring Eastwood, unwilling to risk association with what was now being called one of the most embarrassing political performances by a conservative celebrity in recent memory. His own representatives began declining interview requests, clearly hoping the story would fade from public attention. Political science professors began using clips of the town hall in their classes as examples of how political communication has evolved, and how preparation and expertise now matter more than traditional authority markers like age, fame, or celebrity status. The confrontation also sparked broader discussions about the role of celebrities in political discourse. Many commentators noted that Eastwood's failure demonstrated the limitations of celebrity political engagement, that fame alone is no substitute for actual knowledge of policy issues and real-world political experience. Women's rights organizations celebrated Crockett's performance as an example of how young women of color are reshaping American political leadership. The National Organization for Women issued a statement praising Crockett for demonstrating the intelligence, preparation, and strength that define the next generation of American political leaders. 6 months after the town hall, political analysts were still discussing its impact on American political discourse. Jasmine Crockett had used the platform to launch herself into national prominence, accepting speaking engagements across the country and building a national fundraising network that would support her political career for years to come. The Crockett model became a template for how younger politicians could effectively confront established figures who tried to use age and celebrity status to avoid substantive policy discussion. Political consultants began advising their clients to pull a Crockett, meaning to come prepared with specific facts, figures, and real-world examples that could counter any attempt at intimidation or dismissal. Clint Eastwood, meanwhile, largely withdrew from political commentary following the town hall disaster. His few subsequent public appearances focused exclusively on his film career, avoiding any discussion of politics or policy issues. Industry insiders reported that the 94-year-old actor had been genuinely shaken by the experience and had decided to limit his public engagement to areas where his expertise was unquestioned. The Eastwood-Crockett town hall became more than just a viral political moment. It became a lesson in the power of preparation, the importance of substance over style, and the changing nature of authority in American public discourse. Political communication experts began teaching the confrontation as a case study in how to effectively respond to intimidation tactics and celebrity-based arguments. For young politicians, especially women and people of color, Crockett's performance provided a blueprint for handling situations where established figures try to use their status to avoid substance. Her success demonstrated that competence, preparation, and factual arguments could overcome traditional power dynamics, even when facing opponents with decades of public recognition and cultural authority. The town hall also highlighted the changing media landscape where social media amplification could turn a single political moment into a career-defining event. Crockett's team had been prepared for this possibility, immediately pushing out clips and quotes that maximized the impact of her performance across all platforms. The traditional deference shown to celebrities, elder statesmen, and established figures was giving way to a more merit-based evaluation of political arguments and policy positions. This shift had particular implications for how political campaigns and debates might be conducted in the future. Candidates could no longer rely solely on name recognition, celebrity endorsements, or appeals to traditional authority. Voters, especially younger ones, were increasingly demanding substantive policy discussions and real-world results over symbolic gestures and celebrity appearance. This incredible showdown between generations and ideologies shows us that in modern American politics, preparation beats celebrity every single time. Jasmine Crockett didn't just defend herself, she demonstrated what the future of political leadership looks like. If you enjoyed watching this breakdown of how a prepared politician can outmaneuver even a Hollywood legend, Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We'll continue covering the most explosive political moments and analyzing what they mean for America's future. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video, where we explore who might be brave enough to challenge Jasmine Crockett next, and whether they'll be any more prepared than Clint Eastwood was.